called Yerida L'Tzorech Aliyah, a descent for the sake of an ascent. Anyone who's climbed a mountain, a substantial mountain, from a distance away, has had the experience, because in addition to the major mountain, there are what are called foothills. And usually the way you get to the top of the mountain is you climb a foothill, and then go down to the valley in between, and then climb the next foothill, and go down to the valley in between. But each of the valleys is higher from sea level. So finally you come to the final ascent, where you climb to the top of the mountain. So when you reach the top of a foothill, and you start going down, and somebody says, aren't you supposed to be going up? We're supposed to be going to the top of the mountain? You say, yeah, right. Right now, in order to get to the top of the mountain, I have to go down. Or, you see someone who says, on this site, we're going to build a 20-story office building. Construction starts tomorrow. So the guy comes back, he wants to see the construction of a 20-story office building. And what he sees for 2 months is just digging down a giant hole in the ground. And he says, I don't get it. You're building a 20-story office building above the ground. Why are you digging down? And the answer is, you're digging the foundation. Without a solid foundation, the building won't stand. This is a simplistic application of the idea, you read of the Tzorech Aliyah. Sometimes in order to go up, you first have to go down. But the Talmud is not talking about building buildings or climbing mountains. The Talmud is talking about self-development. And in particular, it's talking about spiritual self-development. Can you imagine circumstances in which, in order to progress further upward, a person will have to take steps backward? What would require that? What would recommend that? In what cases can you take steps backward and feel that you're investing in taking steps forward? So here are a few examples, and if you think of examples on your own, I would be very happy to hear them. When people start investigating Yiddishkeit, if they start learning about it, especially if you're in a yeshiva, you're confronted with a tremendous amount of information and experience, which is new. And the question arises, how are you going to relate to all that information? In particular, if a person's trying on the idea that there is a creator and that this way of life is the way he has instructed us to live, so what I'm learning about, what these people are doing, is somehow the right way to be, then I ought to take what I learn and what I see and implement it. That's naive, in fact, because you're not able to implement it that fast. My recommendation is to pretend that you're an anthropologist and you are observing a new culture. The first thing you want to do is become acquainted with its information and become acquainted with its style. And then you can formulate your attitude towards it in general and decide how to piecemeal, gradually, over a year or 2 years, assimilate as much of that new culture as you're able to, well, how much as you want and how much you're able to internalize. So I tell people, if you have a notebook that you're taking notes of what you're learning, the title of the notebook should be To Do in 6 months, not what I need to take on today. But some people don't get that advice. And some people, when I give the advice, don't believe it. Their attitude is, God created me, God gave this Torah, He gave me the ability, certainly I can do what God wants me to do, and they dive in. But after a while, they begin to lose their bearings. They begin to feel out of control. We had one guy who came to a summer program, completely non-religious background. And when he came to the yeshiva 2 months later, he had a black hat, a black suit, and it was praying 3 times a day, and the whole story. In January, he came to my office and he said, I'm praying 3 times a day, but I don't know if anybody's listening. He was thrilled with the performance, but his mind, which guides his understanding of the world and the truth, was left behind. He was just playing along with the performance. He threw himself in over his head, and then after 6 months, began to realize he doesn't know what he's doing. We would never have suggested that he do that. There was a boy here many, many years ago who came with a ponytail, and after 6 months, he cut it off, and we were all afraid that he cut it off too early, and indeed he didn't make it. There was another boy here 40 years ago who had an earring. There were days when that was popular. After 6 months, he took off the earring, and we were afraid it was too soon. And then we found out that one of the teachers in the yeshiva gave a lecture on a Jewish slave who, against preference, against what we would prefer, when he was supposed to be discharged from slavery, decided to stay with his master. And the result of that is that you bore a hole on his ear, and he said, I don't want to look like a slave who's sticking around with slavery. So he took it off. So we said, okay, if that's the reason he took it off, so then it's all right that he did so, and he made it. He made it. So the idea of diving in is something which is very dangerous. If one dives in, often there comes a point where a person has to call a halt and take some steps backwards because he really can't handle it. And it's right to take steps backwards. And yes, if you have been doing a mitzvah for 6 months, it is perfectly appropriate to say, I can't continue to do this mitzvah because that mitzvah plus everything else that I'm doing puts too much strain on me, and I won't make it to the end of the course. I know of a case. I don't have permission to say the name of the rabbi, but it's a well-known rabbi. This happened maybe 50 years ago. There was a girl, a 14-year-old girl, who decided that she wanted to keep Shabbos. Her parents were not religious at all, and her parents said to her, in our home, you will not keep Shabbos. We don't permit it. So she wrote to this rabbi and asked, what should I do? Now, if you look at the simple law, your parents have no permission whatsoever to tell you to violate any law of the Torah. They owe their allegiance to the Torah just like you do. But he told her, don't keep Shabbos. Because if you set up a life and death struggle between a 14-year-old girl and her parents, they're going to win. And then you'll end up with nothing. I saw this when I was an undergraduate. I was exploring Yiddishkeit, and we had a small group of people, and one of the boys was also exploring it, and his parents found out about it, and they took him out of school for a year and sent him to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist was very successful. He beat out of him any desire or tolerance for any connection with Yiddishkeit. When he came back the following year, he was off limits. So you don't want to set up a battle which is very likely the parents are going to win, and that's good enough reason to give up a mitzvah temporarily in order to be able to fulfill it and grow in Torah in the end. So, and one way that I recommend sort of reducing the crisis to make it easier to deal with, and this has the same idea of taking steps back, is this. Let's say you're considering whether to take on a certain new mitzvah. And you're reasonably confident that you can handle it, but not positive. I recommend that you decide to try it out for a month. After the month, sit down and make an analysis. Not, was I able to keep the mitzvah? That's not enough. What are the consequences that keeping this mitzvah have on my spiritual life altogether? And see whether it's a plus or a minus. And it might be a minus. And if it's a minus, then you say, well, I only did this as an experiment. I didn't commit myself to it. I did the experiment. The result of the experiment is negative. I'll try it again in a year. That way, you're taking a step back, but you don't have to feel like a failure because you didn't commit yourself to it. I'll give you an example. The minyan here, I think, is 7:30 in the morning. And let's say you are faithful to get up to daven at the minyan. And then your friend says to you, if we started the day with an hour's learning before the minyan, the davening would be a different davening, and the whole day would be a different day. What do you think? Let's do it. So you think, let's see, my alarm now goes off at 7:20, the 7:30 minyan. It's going to go off at 6:20 to be there by 6:30. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like a good idea. So you say, okay, let's do it. So now you're getting up at 6:20 every morning. You do it for a month. After the month is over, you think, first of all, did I do it? Did I get up every day? Or did I make excuses and miss days? No, I got up every morning and I was there. How were you in the late afternoon? How were you in the early evening? Suppose somebody asks you for a favor at 6:30 p.m. Do you have space for him? Do you have strength for him? Or are you so tired, so worn out that you just can't do it, just can't take it? And if so, your lack of space, your lack of tolerance, your lack of giving is a downside from the decision to try getting up an hour earlier. Now you make a total evaluation and ask, was the experiment a plus in terms of my spiritual development or a minus? And if it was a minus, then you say, the idea of getting up an hour early is a good idea, but in my case, the sum total consequences were negative rather than positive. So it's not right for me to do it at this time. And I'll try it again 6 months from now or a year from now. And you take the step backwards. This is a step backwards for the sake of your aliyah, for the sake of your being able to go up. You can probably guess where I'm going. I'm going to the destruction of the temple. But let me give you some other examples just to solidify the idea in general. And then we'll get there. There is a Mishnah that says, for certain circumstances, you have three options in bringing a sacrifice: an animal, or a bird, or some flour. It depends on your economic circumstances. Now, the Mishnah in Menachos comments, you can do it with an animal, you can do it with a bird, you can do it with a flour, and each one satisfies the obligation. From here we learn that whether you do a lot or you do a little, if you're doing it for the sake of heaven, you're doing it sincerely to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then it's good. Whether you do a lot or whether you do a little, doesn't matter. Well, each of the three satisfies your obligation. So one of the Achronim asks the following question. I think it's the Taz. Let's analyze this statement from the Talmud. Whether you do a lot or you do a little, if you're dedicated to heaven, your action is good. But look, if you're assuming that all three are dedicated to heaven, that they all have in common, why then doesn't it make any difference at all if one does more and one does less? Why shouldn't you say, since they all are dedicated to doing things for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the one who does more did more, and the one who did less? Why does the amount that they do make no difference? Because this does distinguish them. It's a good question. The Baal Shem Tov answered the question in the following way. When you say that the person who does less, because he's dedicating himself to heaven, his action is just as acceptable, you have to ask yourself, why is he doing less? And maybe the reason he's doing less is because when he does less, he can do it for the sake of heaven. But in order to do more, he has to add in a non-perfect motivation. It won't be all for the sake of heaven. So he reduces the quantity in order to preserve the quality. Then they would be equal. So here again, you have a person who could do more, but he takes a step back from doing more because when he does less, the less that he does is higher quality. I wouldn't say this is always the right thing to do, but it is sometimes the right thing to do. Taking that step back enables a person to increase the quality of what he's doing. I'll tell you where a practical case in which this works. This works with caregivers. If you have a responsibility for another person, elderly parents who need special help, or a special needs child who needs special help, or a friend, whatever it is, and this person is close to you, you love this person. But caring for the person takes time, energy, and you find yourself physically, emotionally depleted because of the investment in helping this person. But part of you says, I love this person. When I take this person, the person is receiving care from someone he loves. If I hire a professional to take over some of the hours, the professional will be responsible, will do what's required, but it's not the same as being cared for by someone who loves you. So I'm cheating the one that I love by giving over some of the hours to a hired professional. But what the caregiver doesn't realize is that when you expend so much effort, when you're so worn out, your quality of care goes down. And when your quality of care goes down, you start to feel guilt. And when you feel guilty, that robs you of your motivation. So you're in a downward psychological spiral. So cutting back the hours in which you give the care, giving over those hours to a professional, and thereby restoring your strength and your dedication to give high quality care is a win-win situation for everybody, even though you're cutting back. Maybe the most dramatic mistake in this direction is sometimes when people come to yeshiva at the beginning, like I described before, they want to serve the Creator. And they are regretful. They are upset about the fact that they have to sleep. What do you mean? 7 hours out of a 24-hour day, I'm not serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How can I justify that? He gives me life. He gives me strength. He gives me blood. I'm not serving him? How could you justify that? So you say, he created you with a need for sleep. So he takes this into consideration. If you don't sleep, then you're not going to be able to serve him at all. Sooner or later, you become to hallucinate, and you're not able to deal with reality. So cutting back the hours of what you call service, really cutting back the hours and sleeping is the service. But it's cutting back the hours from doing the overt mitzvahs that you would have been doing. So all of these are examples of stepping back in order to be able to step forward in a more appropriate way. Everybody get it so far? Okay, now let me take a slightly different type of example. I mean, I'm dated in this. I don't know what they have today, but I remember when 10-speed bicycles were invented. Now you see someone riding a bike like that, and you have an 8-year-old child. What is he doing, Dad? He's pushing those levers and those buttons out here, clickety-click, clickety-click, and then his feet go around faster. You go, what's going on there? I said, your bike may have 1 speed or 2 speeds. He has 10 speeds. You see that hill? He can go up that hill because he puts it in a very low gear where 1 revolution takes him 2 feet instead of 12 feet, and then he has the power to go up the hill. So it's very useful to have a 10-speed bike. I used to have one when I taught at Hopkins. I used to ride the bike to the university, and there was a high hill, and it was very nice. So the kid says, Abba, get me one of those. Get me one of those. I want one of those. Now, there are multi-speed bikes for kids. So you say, okay, I'll get you one. I'm ordering it. It'll be delivered. I'm just telling you, don't get on the bike until I get home. Because it's new and it's complicated. It requires special skill to do it. Let me introduce you to it, and let me help you learn how to ride it. And the kid, like all 8-year-olds, all smart 8-year-olds will say, sure, Dad. Uh-huh. Sure. Bye, Dad. Bye. Is it coming yet? Did it come yet? So it comes in a big box, and you open it up, and there's an instruction booklet. It says, I have instructions. I'm not going to sit and read instructions. There's pedals, there's wheels, there's tires. Let's go. And of course, he falls off, and he gets hurt one way or another. So if he gets hurt and learns his lesson, that's one thing. Then the father can say, you now realize that what I told you was credible. I told you not to take it out, and you took it out. Maybe you'll listen to me next time. But if the child hasn't learned the lesson, if the child has a certain wildness about him and a certain undeserved self-confidence, I can do anything and nothing can hurt me, you might say, this is not a good time to give you this bicycle. Because if you have this bicycle, you're going to get hurt. So I'm going to take it away, I'm going to lock it up, and in 6 months, we'll try to give you it again. Because I want to protect you from getting hurt. The same way, when you'll have children, and your children will see you strike matches, I don't know if you can remember when you were 4, but boy, is that fascinating. Look what happens. He scratches it, and there's a flame. Wow. Where do they keep the matches in this house? And many children just have to do that. They just have to do that. So you say, I know he's 4 years old. Of course, it's a boy, not a girl. And you lock up the matches because you don't want to have it. Because having something that's powerful and something that he's not going to use appropriately is dangerous for him. So you take away the matches to protect himself, to protect him from the consequences of misuse. That's also a step backwards. You're not ready for this yet. I'm holding you back. And when you're 9 and you're more settled and more mature, then you'll have the right to use matches. So now we have to take a look at the loss of the temple and ask, it's definitely a Yerida L'Tzorech Aliyah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does everything as an investment in the ultimate climb towards the world's perfection and even each person's perfection. And if there is a step backwards, and losing the temple is definitely a step backwards, then it's got to be for the sake of eventually climbing better and climbing higher. So what are the dimensions where we understand that depriving us of the temple is something which was necessary as an investment in our future spiritual development? Question is clear? So to answer that, we have to understand what roles the temple played and how they could be misused, badly interacted with, and the consequences that it could cause, and realize that Kodesh Baruch Hu deprived us of the temple so as to prevent those calamities. Now, I should try to remember what I say in different contexts. Did I talk to you about the temple being the place where Hashem manifests himself for the sake of having a relationship? We talked about that yesterday. Okay. So let me tell you what it says in the Torah about after the golden calf. After the golden calf, and Hashem says that I want you to go into the land of Israel, and a question arises, shall Hashem himself accompany us on this trip? Or shall Hashem send a malach, which is angel in English and should be understood as an agent, not a messenger? That's a wrong translation. Many malachim don't give messages to anybody, but they act on the Kodesh Baruch Hu's behalf. Shall a Kodesh Baruch Hu accompany us, or shall a malach accompany us and not a Kodesh Baruch Hu? And both possibilities are expressed in different verses. And according to the Drosh Saran, this is how the decision is being made. Each possibility has a plus and a minus. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu accompanies you, and if there's a rebellion, it's a rebellion against the creator of the universe directly. That is an extremely serious rebellion. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu sends an angel who's his agent, and the rebellion takes place in the context of the agent, the rebellion is not nearly so serious. On the other hand, if there's a rebellion and there is a demand for justice, and that requires a punishment, only Kadosh Baruch Hu can forgive, because the rebellion ultimately is against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So although on the one hand the rebellion is a worse rebellion, but if he's the one who's present and guiding the interaction, he can forgive. If the Malach is there, the angel is there who's acting on Kadosh Baruch Hu's behalf, he can't forgive, because the rebellion isn't against the Malach, the rebellion is against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Not directly, indirectly, but the Malach has authority from the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Anyone who rebels against the Malach automatically is rebelling against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Just like where you have a kingdom, and the king appoints governors for various provinces, and someone in a province violates the law that the governor sets up, since the governor got his authority from the king, a rebellion against the governor's law is a rebellion against the king. But since it's the king, the governor can't forgive him. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm considering sending a malach with you, because if you rebel, it'll be a less serious rebellion and won't call forth such serious consequences. And the people say, we want to have you with us because you are the one who ultimately has in his hands the ability to repair the rebellion that we perform. And that being the case, we would prefer to have you. Now, in the end, if I'm not mistaken, let's leave it at that. I think he sends a malach, right? He does send a malach, which means he's taking a step back. He's reducing this closeness of his presence, because a rebellion in his face is a much worse rebellion. So here, similarly, the temple was a place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence was manifest. We spoke about this. What happens when there's a rebellion? Well, the rebellion is in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it had very serious consequences. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence remains and the rebellion continues, it's going to continue to be this high-level, serious failure. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to remove my presence. I'm going to give over the custodianship of the people to an intermediary, to a malach, to an agent, and then if there isn't an immediate repair for the rebellion, or if the new rebellions will take place, they won't be nearly so serious, because my presence won't be available that way. And that's why in the second temple, where the rebellion that took place, which caused the destruction of the first temple, wasn't completely repaired. It wasn't repaired. Indeed, I'm going to go off a little bit on a tangent, but we're talking about that second temple. You have to appreciate, the second temple, we spoke about this, did not have the dwelling of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the same way that the first did. There were 10 continuous miracles we spoke about, only in the first temple, not in the second temple. The ark with the tablets was not there. The Urim V'Tumim, which enabled the people to communicate with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the high priest, were not there. So the second temple was a shell compared to the first temple. It was a shell without the inner life that gave it its connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that meant that whatever happens in the second temple and bad things happen in the second temple. But they're not in the presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the same way, and therefore the significance of the rebellion is not such a significant rebellion. Significance, not such serious rebellion. And when we go through history and we see the reduction of powers, reduction of authority, reduction of institutions, I think that's one way we have to look at all of them. We lost the Sanhedrin. Now, we lost the Sanhedrin because the members of the Sanhedrin had to have ordination. Ordination is a continuous historical process from Moses down to about the 3rd century CE. From scholar to disciple, scholar to disciple, till about the 3rd century CE. Then it stopped. It stopped because of the Roman persecutions. So, it didn't really stop because of the Roman persecutions. The Kadosh Baruch Hu allowed Roman persecution to the extent that we no longer were able to perform ordination. That means since that time, we have not had a Sanhedrin. Since we have not had a Sanhedrin, we've not been able to establish certain laws. We've not been able to change and modify certain laws because we don't have the authority to do it. Now, there are people who say, well, if it's the lack of a Sanhedrin that paralyzes us in this legal way, make a Sanhedrin and do it. That's to miss the point. If a Kodesh Baruch Hu engineered that we don't have the qualifications of Sanhedrin, he's sending us a message, I don't want you to have a Sanhedrin. And that being the case, someone's going to fabricate a Sanhedrin and pretend to handle these legal issues is going to be compounding the crime. It's sort of like when the father locks up the bicycle, the kid goes to some friends and asks, how do you crack locks? How do you pick locks? Because I want the bicycle. That won't be better, that'll be worse. The father locked up the bicycle to protect his son against danger. And he's going to outsmart his father by opening up the locks. That's to miss the whole message. So one of the reasons that we lose the temple or the Sanhedrin or other things like prophecy, which stopped also after the first 1,000 years, is because having them leaves us open to more serious errors, more serious failures, which then has more serious consequences for us. So it's protection for us. The same thing, by the way, is the cessation of prophecy. Prophecy was another way of a Kadosh Baruch Hu injecting his presence into the Jewish people. I mentioned this the other day briefly, but I want to add a little bit more of the depth of this because it's really the same issue. We spoke about doctors. In those days, people didn't go to doctors because they went to the prophet. The prophet told them what a Kadosh Baruch Hu wants. He fixed his spiritual problem. The physical symptoms went away. It's much more than that. In administering the Torah, judgments have to be made, laws. Judgments have to be made which aren't simply an application of rules in the rule book. They require evaluation and what we call, in describing people, a person has good judgment, where you can't explicitly describe the evidence and the rules that you're following. You sum up the entire situation and you understand that this is what needs to be done. I'll give you an example. When Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. Why not? Is there any problem with playing a musical instrument on Shabbos and that's why not? No, that's not why not. We're talking about a biblical mitzvah now, not playing for fun. But the rabbi said, don't do it. Why not? Because blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is complicated. It has to be done in a certain way to be satisfied. And let's imagine poor Ruvain, who has a shofar, but he's not too sure, and he's not too clever, and he's also not very good at blowing the shofar and getting the right sounds, and he's worried. He's worried about whether he'll do the mitzvah correctly or not. And every year on Rosh Hashanah, he goes to the expert, and he says, please listen to me when I blow the shofar and tell me if I did it right. Every year. This year it happens that Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos. To get from Reuven's house to the expert's house, you have to go through a public area, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, carrying the shofar. But Reuven doesn't think of that. He knows it's Rosh Hashanah, and he's got to blow the shofar right, and he only knows it's right when the expert tells him. So, without taking Shabbos into account, he carries the shofar through a public domain in order to do the mitzvah of shofar correctly. Well, you're not supposed to do that. Legally, you're not supposed to do that. So now, hear the following calculation. If we have a mitzvah of shofar for the whole Jewish people on that Rosh Hashanah that came out on Shabbos, maybe, we don't know for sure, maybe some Jew who wants to do it best and forgetting that it's Shabbos will inadvertently carry the shofar through the public domain and violate Shabbos. We can't permit that. We can't allow that. We can't even allow it as an accident. So we cancel the mitzvah of shofar for the whole of the Jewish people that year. You'll tell me there's a second day, you blow on the second day? That's rabbinic. That's not biblical. The biblical mitzvah of shofar is off the page. I have a challenge. Explain to me how the evaluation is made that one thing is more important than the other. Why is the possible innocent inadvertent violation of Shabbos more worrisome than losing the whole mitzvah of shofar? Who says one's more important than the other? There's no explicit rule, no explicit value, no explicit law that this is following. The rabbis made a calculation. Yeah, this is more important than that. Protecting against the possible inadvertent violation of Shabbos is more important than the whole of the Jewish people blowing shofar that year. How do you make an evaluation like that? You have to have a sense of what the Torah wants, a sense of the values of the Torah, the priorities of the Torah, so as to be able to make a judgment like that. Where do you get that sense from? I think there's a number of answers, but one of the answers is getting it from prophecy in the following way. When Saul was to become king, Samuel the prophet said to him, I want you to go to such and such a place. On the way you'll meet a band of roving disciples of the prophets, and you too will prophesy, you'll become a different person. Those are very interesting words. You'll have prophecy temporarily, and to become a different person. So the Kuzari says, you have to understand that the experience of prophecy changes the person. He's not the same person afterwards. Maybe I'll make reference to something you might have read about. How about near-death experiences or clinical death experiences? Very often when people come back for something like that, their attitude toward life is seriously changed. I saw something, I experienced something, which leads me to understand there's more to the world than what I thought. And now, knowing that extra information about the world, I feel about my life in a very different way. Having the experience changes the person's priorities, changes his level of seriousness about life, appreciation for life. Prophecy does that also. So now, there's a double effect here. Number one, the prophet doesn't live his life the way he used to live his life. And number two, the people who interact with him see that he doesn't live his life the way he used to live his life. And this has an effect on the society as a whole to induce in the society certain understandings, certain appreciations, certain evaluations. And this becomes part of the culture of the society. And this went on for 1,000 years. There were prophets, and everyone alive interacted with prophets for 1,000 years. This was an infusion, I would call it, of divine spirit into the ethos, into the very experience of the Jewish people, which then later, when they have to make an evaluation, what's more important, the whole nation blowing shofar or protecting Shabbos against a possible inadvertent violation, they could say, yeah, we can see that. We can see it's more important. We can see it's more important, and therefore we have to do it this way. So this is another way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu invested his presence into the Jewish people, and it has a long-term effect. But we lost prophecy, the direct prophecy. We lost the influx of energy, but the impact that it had on the culture of the people, on the psychology of the people, understanding of the people, that impact remains. So there's another example of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu invested over a long period of time and then retracted that investment. Now, why did he retract that investment? So given the theme that we're talking about, because if you interact with prophets and you rebel, that's much more serious. The prophet speaks to you in God's name. He has a message from the Creator. That being the case, if there is a rebellion, it's a much more serious rebellion. So withholding prophecy is a way of saving us from those more serious rebellions. And indeed, the coming of the Mashiach depends upon the restoration of prophecy. Elijah the prophet, will come before the Mashiach, and he will be the one to be able to identify the Mashiach to us. So, it's again a Yerida L'Tzarech Aliyah. Now, when you receive this kind of impact, if you manage to keep in your mind that it's for the sake of eventual ascent, then you can feel the caring in it, rather than feeling you've been deprived of something, rather than feeling that you've lost out, rather than feeling that the one in authority is simply harming you. You can feel that the one in authority is protecting you from something even worse that you would stumble into without this protection. And that's a sense in which there has to be a comfort, even in the destruction, a comfort even in the loss, when you know that it's being done for that purpose. Sometimes with children, they don't realize that till later. The 4-year-old wants to come to dinner and he doesn't want to wash his hands. And when you tell him to wash his hands, he thinks, my father's prejudiced against brown. Don't know why. I thought we were taught to treat all people equally, but my father has a prejudice against brown on my hands. And if the father is foolish enough to tell his child there are invisible things that make you sick, and that's what washing your hands does, the child says, oh man, my father thinks there are invisible things that make you sick. What kind of father do I have? What family am I in? Am I safe here? Because the 4-year-old says, show it or give it up. Let me see it. If I don't see it, it's not there. But when he's 12 and he's learned something, you expect him to respond and say, yeah, I hear. I remember what you did, and I remember why you did it, and I appreciate you taking care of me. And then he should learn that lesson for the future in life. When things happen, he doesn't know why. Understand that there's a care in that circumstance also. So we have to appreciate that this loss of the temple, it's not a slap. It's like taking the matches and locking them up. It's not vindictive. It's not an expression of anger. It's a question of protecting us from something worse. Yeah.
So I feel like the other really tricky aspect is figuring out when the person is ready for an aliyah. And I know Rabbi talked about how you can, experiment with it and things like that. But a person, the trickiest Yetzer Hara is kind of telling yourself that, I've been keeping it sort of low key. I go after night Seder, I watch something on my phone just to relax, and I've been telling myself for 2 months or 3 months that that's okay, and then and I feel like I'm ready for it now. So is there, obviously it's kind of to each person their unique circumstances, but does everybody have like a general piece of advice on when a person knows they're ready to push a little bit more?
I don't have a direct piece of advice, but I have 2 strategies which are partial strategies. One is what I said before, that's to do it as an experiment, only to commit to a month. And after a month, make an evaluation. So you're, or less or more, depending on what it is. And that being the case, you're gathering more information about yourself. So you can make a better judgment about yourself. That definitely can help. And also, if there's someone with whom you have a good relationship and who has the experience of people growing and developing in Yiddishkeit, can say to you, you're ready for this or you aren't ready for this. You can take advice like that. I will tell you, there's a certain trick here. Sometimes when I'm asked whether a person, whether he should take a step, I don't always give a strictly accurate answer because I'm afraid of the following psychological effect. If I say that he's ready, then in his mind he says, well, Gottleib thinks I'm ready. Me, I don't know. That's why I asked him. I don't know. But he thinks I'm ready. Okay, I'll trust him and I'll try. Now suppose it gets difficult. Well, if it gets difficult, you can always say, so Gottleib made a mistake. Okay, so therefore, no skin off my back. Whereas, if I ask him, do you think you're ready? And he thinks about it and he says, yeah, I think I'm ready. And he does it, and it gets tough. If he stops, if he gives up, then he's got to admit that he was wrong. That gives him a much stiffer backbone to make it work. So I don't want to deprive him of that motivation by giving that answer. So I might refuse to answer, simply say, when you think you're ready, then I would support it. But the person himself has to feel that he's ready, because that gives him the incentive to make it work, just because he doesn't want to be wrong.
I also follow up on it. So a lot of people who come to yeshiva, especially about shuva yeshivas, really across the board, a lot of people just hit the ground running, and first 2 months, 3 months, they're just accomplishing things they never could have thought they would have accomplished. I think a really natural thing to happen is at some point, reality kind of kicks in, and it's like, wait a second, I came here, I was at this level, now I'm all the way over here, and a person realizes that it's not sustainable. You start taking steps back, the ask the Rabbi and the advise, but then at some point, this sort of when do you realize they're like, wait a second, but I know I was able to achieve all that. When am I ready to just fully take that back on? I was able to learn all of it. It's like, and I feel like a person should never try to jump back to, they were learning all day and now they cut 2 hours off. I don't think it should be that a person says, okay, I'm ready to take all the 2 hours back on. You should go gradually, right?
In general, I think that's right. And I think you're describing something which I was trying to describe at the beginning, a person who jumps ahead too fast. Hitting the ground running, I think, is a very good example of what happens. Now, if a person comes on a 2-week program, let him learn 18 hours a day. He's not going to kill himself in 2 weeks. But if he comes for 6 months, I say, set up a schedule that you can maintain reasonably for 6 months. Take off a couple hours a day and play basketball, or go for a walk, or read something, or listen to music, or let yourself relax, let yourself just gather your strength for the next session. You're not used to it. Especially if you went to college, you're not used to it. You don't know what an 8-hour-a-day studying is, and you don't know what a 42-week year is. You're used to a 30-week year. You're basically used to fooling around. Unless you did a degree in physics, you spent your time fooling around. And you can't just walk into a yeshiva and become a yeshiva bacher. See those guys over there in the basement, they're learning 12 hours a day? But they were here for a year before they did that. So if you hit the ground running, you're going to burn out. And burning out has its own negative consequences. So I didn't make it. So this isn't really for me. I really can't do it. I'm not cut out for this. And you walk out the door. And that's wrong. Because you took on too much at the outset. So you have to be careful to measure what you're doing to the abilities you have to do it well. One criterion that I do have is this. You should feel in charge of your own development. You shouldn't do something because you're pushed. Reuven and I came to yeshiva at the same time, and he's putting on talis and tefillin, and I haven't got to it yet. I guess, Reuven's not better than I am. If he could do it, I can do it also. No. You make the step when you feel it's right for you. When you feel excited about it, enthused about it, you measure your time and your effort and your other responsibilities. Say, yes, I can add this to my program. You should feel that you're taking the step because it's a right step for you, not because you owe it to somebody else. That's my philosophy. It was the philosophy of my Rabbi Zatzal. I think it's the philosophy of people in the yeshiva that I know, that you don't push somebody to do something which, there can always be exceptions, but the general idea is you don't push somebody until he feels ready to do it. He feels it's right for him. Because, not always because the person's going to be right about himself. People make mistakes about themselves. But the minute you feel that the whole project is out of your control, that's very dangerous. That's very dangerous. So I recommend against it. Okay, today's Wednesday. Tomorrow, one more attempt to prepare for Yeshivat, and then maybe the Mashiach will come before.